Hello all. In this video I'll be covering my finishing process for my furniture. It's the result of around 6 years trial and error, but has resulted in me using 3 types of finish for different woods, applied with the same process, giving me a uniform look across the range, all of which I'll explain as we go. My process takes days, often running into a second week, but I think it's worth it. On the bench I have 3 pieces of wood: Poplar to represent the light coloured, Iroko the rich coloured, and oak to represent oak. If there's one secret to good finishing, it's good prep, and that means sanding. Lots and lots of sanding. When you think you've done or had enough, leave it, sleep on it, come back the next day, run your hand around and sand some more. It needs to be dry wood too. 10% moisture or below is generally good. It makes a difference with the finer grits, not to mention the general stability of your pieces. What grits of sandpaper are we talking about then? Well, what you start at depends on the roughness of assembly. My pieces here have been through the thicknesser, so straight in at 120, then 180, then 240, and then 320. On the radius corners of my furniture, I'll often go to 400 grit. They sometimes need a tad more coaxing into looking just peachy. I can sense a short intake of breath from some of you at the idea of sanding to 400 grit before applying any finish. We'll get to that. The radius corners and transitions on my furniture are all hand sanded, as are the finishing strokes with the higher grits. But surfaces and long edges I use random orbital. This one has a 3.5mm orbit, so good for finishing. These blue sanding discs you may have noticed me using in all my vids are nothing fancy. They are Deerfoss wet and dry 8 hole. Cheap, reliable, gimmick free, and available from 40 to 3000 grit. Don't be fooled by my hand on the top of the sander there. I'm not pushing down on it, just assisting its balance as it has the vac hose hanging out the back of it. Use your fingertips to feel as you work for smoothness and to highlight areas that need a little more attention. This applies right through the process too. Most of the hard work with the sanding is done with the lower grits, 120 and 180 in my case, as it's they that make the surfaces good. Put in the work with those and it's just a light going over with the higher grits. Here I've jumped to putting on the 320 grit. I didn't film it at this point, but between each grit it's important to vacuum off the work with a bristle attachment, then go over with a dry cloth to remove dust and any dislodged grit from the previous sheet. Only then proceed to the next grit up. Woods like the Iroko and oak, as you'll probably know, can have a lot going on their surfaces. Deep pored and fibrous, they can need a bit more coaxing into smooth, but just keep at it with the lower grits and they do come good. Here's the bristled vac attachment by the way, in case you weren't sure what I was on about. Like I say, fundamental between each grit as well as at the end. Move the bristles with the grain, then rub down with a soft dry cloth. You can see it lifts the very fine stuff off. Let's get on to the actual finishes I use then. The light woods like this poplar, white beech and maple, I like to maintain their lightness. That is, avoid any yellowing from a finish. For this, the best product I found is Bona Mega Natural. They do glossy and stained versions, but this is their neutral, leaving the original wood colour almost unchanged. As you'd imagine, being a floor finish, it's very hard wearing. It's a blend of natural oils apparently. What they are I've no idea, but it's near as damn it odourless and pretty much the perfect product for my light furniture. As with all the finishes I'll show, application is liberal, but this stuff is quick drying so you'll need to rub or brush in carefully to avoid drips or pools. I'll be applying all the finishes with soft rags here. We'll come back to this one. As mentioned earlier, for the richer coloured woods, like the Iroko here, or indeed walnut and cherry, I use a blend that I have in the little pot here. In my mix, I use 30% tung oil, 30% raw linseed oil, and the remaining 40% I use yacht varnish. Got to be an oil-based varnish to mix properly by the way. There's all sorts of thoughts on these type of blends, and they're really nothing new. In the marine and boat building world, there have been variations on these blends as old as time. The oils penetrate well and offer a rich but natural colouring, whilst the yacht varnish provides the protection. Good for in and outdoor use if that's what you wanted and all. Again, apply it liberally and work it in. Emphasis on work it in with this stuff. I keep rubbing until the surface barely looks wet anymore. As before, we'll come back to this. For the oak, it's the hard wax oil. Osmo Clear Glossy, and only their Clear Glossy, is the one that gives me the finish I'm after on oak. It feels a bit like Osmo's fallen out of favour in the last couple of years after seemingly being used by almost everyone on everything. Such is the way with heavily pro-mode products in this age, I suppose. Still, this particular product works for me. You need to give it its proper time to get the most from it though. As with the other two, my application is liberal. Like my oil varnish mix, I like to work the Osmo in, working it until again there's little sign of wetness. Although I worked the Iroko and oak almost dry, in reality they aren't. After about 40 minutes, I use a dry cloth on each to ensure excess is removed. They're then ready to go up to the spare room in the house for a day or so to properly dry. The Poplar by this point is ready for another coating of the Bona Mega. It too then goes into the house for a day or so. Of course, if you have a workshop with a regulated climate, then it can stay in there as long as it's away from dust. This is a couple of days later and the pieces have assumed their positions on the bench to undergo the exact same process you've just seen again. I should say though that on actual furniture pieces, after their first finishing treatment, they will stay in my spare room, which I'm sure you've gathered has become a storage facility, from 2 to 4 weeks before getting the second coat. This is to let the pieces acclimatise and settle. If there's any movement, it can be dealt with at this stage before completing the finish. In terms of grain lift, if it occurs, it's usually on the curved joints on my pieces. That too can be addressed before applying the second treatment. But high grit finish sanding very much minimises it, and on these very dry, very smooth pieces, there's no discernible grain lift, so the second coats can go straight on. You might also have noticed that, especially with regards to the Bona Mega and the Osmo, that I'm not prepping or applying as per the manufacturer's instructions. The instructions are essentially butt covering, the foolproof methods if you like. But every one of these finishes is essentially oil, and if you give them proper time and attention, they're not that picky, and they will penetrate and adhere to surfaces sanded above 240. Many furniture makers go to 320 or 400 before finishes. You just can't rush them. I've got pieces now a little over 3 years old that I developed this process on that have endured the usual rigours of use, people, animals, spills, etc., and the finishes still look as good as the day they were completed. It's important to understand that a finish that is dry isn't necessarily a finish that is cured. It's two different things, and patience is key. Another 2 days later then, and the pieces are out for their final applications. One difference now is that the pieces treated with the Bona Mega and the Osmo get a super light sand with 500 grit. This isn't really a denib, as the pieces are already smooth. It's just to level out any last imperfections, making them glass smooth before the final coats. The Iroko with the oil varnish mix doesn't need to be sanded like the other two. The sanded pieces are vacuumed and rubbed down with a dry cloth to remove as much dust as possible, then they all get the final coats. Same as before, then another 2 days drying. In summary then, the oak had 3 coats of Osmo, the Iroko 3 coats of oil varnish, and the Poplar 2 coats of Bona Mega each outing, so 6 in total. About 6 days have elapsed. For the final stage of finishing, it's polishing time. I used 3M's Perfect It system. The green is the cutting compound, the yellow is the ultrafine polish, and the blue is the ultrafiner, the finest of the polishes. I only use the green and the yellow as on these finishes there's no discernible benefit from the ultrafiner blue. And for the polisher, I run my Bosch Gex in turbo mode, basically direct drive rotation on speed number 4. I put a little of the paste on the workpiece and polish it in until an obvious sheen comes through, which you can see on screen hopefully. Then get to rub down with the appropriate cloth, all colour coded keeping it simple. This damn autofocus. Finally, the yellow ultrafine polish. A couple of small dabs straight onto the work. After polishing, a quick rub down with the cloth. I'll show the results shortly. The Iroko with the oil varnish finish, I thought I'd split into 3 to show you the difference as it's a wider board, some black electrical tape separating the areas. As you can see, it is a fairly matte finish as is, although it is super smooth and hasn't needed nearly the attention of the others to remain so. The oil varnish finishes are really about providing rich colour whilst offering good, long-lasting protection from daily use and abuse. It will take another finish over the top, so you could use a finish coat of just the varnish for a more glossy look for example. Wax or wax oil is a popular finish on oil varnish. Here I'll apply a coat of Keith Brown's clear wax, working in then buffing off. The lighter far side I'll just polish as you've seen me do for the other pieces. This is how I actually finish the oil varnish. All my finishes get the same polish treatment in other words. The centre strip I left untouched. The results then. Very hard to get it to show with my poor workshop lighting, but hopefully you can see the glass-like surface on the left that was polished. Feels amazing. The right was waxed, and the lighting is not really doing it much justice, but it does have a pleasing matte sheen and not glass-like like the polished side, but a very nice smoothness. The Bona Mega polishes insanely well and feels incredible. It really helps the lighter woods that can sometimes be less eye-catching than the richer coloured stand out and hold their own. The Osmo 2 polishes extremely well, giving a similar glass-like appearance to the Bona Mega, and tames the oak beautifully while enhancing its natural golden colour. So with basically the same process, 3 different finished products give me the same look and feel on a large range of timbers. They not only keep and lift the natural colours, but provide a hard-wearing and long-lasting protection from UV, spills and knocks. They're low maintenance and clean down easily. Crucially for me, they all still feel like wood, warm to the touch. There's not that separation that a high lacquer or gloss can give, feeling almost plasticky. It's taken me a lot of experimenting to get to this point where I'm confident in my furniture finishes. I hope you can take away from this that although received wisdom is a good place to start with regards finishing, for a look and feel that speaks to you, there's a lot to experiment and have fun with. Grab yourself some offcuts and play around a little, read widely and see what's out there. Anyway, I hope this relatively dull aspect of the craft has proved interesting to you. A like and sub is always appreciated if you haven't already. There's a thanks button below if you'd like to support the channel in that way. Comments and questions always welcome, and as always, if you've made it this far, thanks for watching.